All right, we are going to be joined now by some panelists to discuss this. And one thing that I really want people to remember is Lynn Alden has a fabulous quote about Bitcoin's energy use. She talked about how right now Bitcoin uses 1/10 of 1% of the world's energy, and she called it a rounding error. But it's literally a rounding error because every year when scientists estimate the amount of energy used by all industries, they can be off by several percentage points. So it is literally a rounding error. And if it's a network that's used by billions of people, she estimates that it will be several tenths of a percentage. So again, very important topic. I want to introduce Adam back to the stage, CEO of Blockstream, and Kristian Csepcsar, CMO at Braiins. All right, so that was a great presentation that talked a little bit about how renewables are going to be sort of the future as we have this push toward more sustainable energy. But at the same time, I wanted to kind of hear your perspectives on right now how difficult it is to sort of leapfrog, because as I mentioned before, coming from a media background, there's a lot of FUD and misunderstanding about energy economics out there, right? And we want to make these great headlines of net zero by a certain year, but that's very difficult because there's a huge portion of the world's population that still doesn't have access to low-cost, reliable energy. And renewables right now, solar and wind only consist of 3% of the world's energy use. Most of that is electricity, and that's only 1/5 of the world's energy uses. So any one of you can kind of take it, but how difficult is it to kind of move in this area, and why is it important for Bitcoin mining to sort of fill that role?
Well, I think there are a few problems, a few aspects of how the electricity grids work that are, any complicated system like that is not that well understood, and so that doesn't get explained in the media because they're trying to explain a simplified version. There's a shortage of power. Well, there might be a shortage of power in one place for one period of time, but a massive surplus of power 1,000 kilometers away. And so one key point is that you can't transport power across large distances, or you lose a lot of it in transmission losses. And the other point is that some power is transient. So if it's solar in the day, or if it's wind when it's windy and not when it's not windy, is that, and some types of power source take a while to start and then a while to stop. And so it's also hard to store power across time. And so that results in a situation where you can have, a large percentage of the world's power is rejected, like generated but not used. And that's just something that people don't understand. And also, there's an economic interest, sort of policy interest, to see more renewable energies and a transition to renewable energies. But ultimately, that's a policy objective, but for things to get built in the real world, it needs financing. And for there to be financing, the people that build in the power infrastructure have to find a way to be profitable. And I think that's where Bitcoin can come in, because it can be a buyer of last resort and buy all the spare power. Bearing in mind that most power infrastructure is built for peak demand, so half of it is unused, or it's only used at peak a few times of the year or a little part of the day, and that it can't be transported. So, there are big excesses of power in some places and shortages in other places.
Well, Jaran, you touched on a lot of these points in your presentation, and one of the things you mentioned, and Adam now, again, is that idea of stranded energy. Can you talk a little bit more about just how much energy the world has in terms of stranded, and how Bitcoin mining actually captures that?
Stranded energy is the biggest problem of the energy industry. It's probably even the biggest problem we have in humanity. And the thing is, fossil fuels are not stranded because you dig up the fuel and then you transport the fuel to close to a city, and then you use it to generate electricity or use it to power cars. But the renewable energy sources are very often stranded. And because you can't take a sun to another place, you can't take wind to another place, you can't take a hydro reservoir and transport it to another place. So they are much more localized to a specific area. And Bitcoin mining, as I explained in the presentation, is the most flexible energy consumer in the world, and it's location agnostic specifically. So you can take Bitcoin miners exactly to the renewable energy energy resources and use this excess energy for Bitcoin mining. And this will also incentivize the development of renewable energy sources that often are located very far away from where people live. Energy sources that previously were completely stranded and not developed because they're too far away from where people live. But if Bitcoin miners come there and incentivize development, then you can actually have the massive wind farms or solar farms or hydro projects which you couldn't have before. And then later people can move there, or we can get other industries there. So Bitcoin mining can unlock the industrialization of many areas around the world which previously have been not industrialized.
Yeah.
Can I continue? I'll touch on two points here. Many people don't understand flexible load precisely, so I just want to explain. Because some people argue, okay, we have stranded energy, let's bring some production there and let's do something more useful than Bitcoin mining. They're like, don't mine Bitcoin with the energy, just produce something, produce some goods that people can actually use, not their funny intermittent money. But what they don't realize is that like the production is process-based. So you start, and it's very difficult to just, oh, now we have peak solar energy, so we just produce for like 2 hours and then stop, and then wait for another day for, and again, like peak supply of solar energy. So it's difficult for like production of goods to use this stranded energy. With mining, the geniusness there, it's not the process based. So if you mine for a minute, your chances to find a block is the same as the minute before. So you can start and stop literally anytime you want. And that's what really people don't understand. So it's like there is no second best. Like there is no other flexible load like Bitcoin mining, because it can literally start and stop anytime in a matter of literally 2 seconds and use that stranded energy. And show me somebody going to a middle of nowhere and setting up a production facility for whatever good you can imagine and just saying, oh, by the way, you'll just use it like an hour and a half a day in different times, so I cannot tell you exactly when. And then, so really the mining as not being like process-based thing is really the geniusness there.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it is actually stabilizing grids and providing for a balance in that supply and demand. And I love the example of West Texas that you brought up, because Nick Carter wrote a commentary on the White House report, the climate report on crypto mining, and nowhere do they mention these sorts of positive examples of how, Bitcoin is actually incentivizing this movement, this push toward renewable energy. And like you mentioned, in West Texas, there are these negative priced, areas for energy, which is perfect for Bitcoin mining, but it's also, again, making it so that more farms are produced, more solar and wind farms are created, because then they have a customer always in any place. You also mentioned location agnostic. In Africa, there are so many locations where hydro can really be utilized and optimized. So why do you think it's so difficult for political figures and media figures to understand it when the data is clearly there, if they were to look for it, that Bitcoin is pushing toward this renewable energy?
I mean, I think people are not accustomed to thinking in a kind of economic business way, and so they would almost prefer that the excess power from a hydro dam be poured downstream than used for something that they're not personally interested in, which is illogical because, whether they personally are interested in Bitcoin or not, the fact that the hydro dam can sell all of the unused power to Bitcoin miners will make the hydro operator more efficient. They'll make more money, they'll build more hydro dams, they'll push the cost of power down for everybody and lead to prosperity. I mean, human prosperity is very correlated with access to low-cost power across hundreds of years, and there's no reason to suppose that would stop. And in fact, in today's environment, we're actually experiencing the opposite, which is some policy missteps in turning off, some types of power prematurely before the replacements are actually causing economic hardship. So really the point is that if you have a willing trade of somebody who's willing to buy something, it's illogical to stand in the way of that trade, because that will improve the economic environment for everybody and improve the excess of power, robustness of power that's available all the time, at lower prices, and that's generally good for the whole of society.
I don't agree completely in a sense that we act illogically, in a sense like Adam Smith was right, I think. The biggest problem for me is the education, because even in mining, a lot of the parties are just uneducated. We just don't know. And just imagine being a politician and not knowing anything about this funny internet money. So I think the education is the biggest hurdle which we have to overcome. But in the end, I hope that we can be rational and Adam Smith is right. Otherwise, we're all screwed.
No, I think you brought up a great point. I think it's really interesting because I've often said that I think most people, especially in media and politics, act more out of ignorance as opposed to malice because there is such a lack of understanding. And there's a lot of work to be done if you want to really understand energy and energy economics. And most people don't take the time to do that. And maybe the incentive system is so broken that they aren't motivated to do so. Can any of you offer kind of a little bit more perspective on this idea of us trying to get to net zero by a certain year that is approaching very, very quickly? Some states in the U.S. are already moving toward all electric vehicles within the next couple of years. But this idea of again how difficult it is to just leapfrog all the way to renewables, and is Bitcoin really going to provide maybe that buffer?
Well, I think it could provide the finance to build some of that infrastructure. I think another thing that is less understood is that it's hard to balance grids. So, you can't just, if there's a surplus power and it doesn't get consumed, it can literally break things. And of course, if you run out of power, that will create a power cut. So the introduction of more variable production power sources like solar and wind, which are, stopping and starting and varying, makes it, places a strain on the grid. So the grid itself needs to be upgraded in a lot of ways. And having a buffer of very short-term power storage, like batteries or pumped hydro or something like that, those are things that need investment. And so basically, I think it's technologically achievable, but it will require billions and billions of dollars, and nobody is providing that money unless there's a buyer for the power. So I think Bitcoin can sort of bootstrap that.
And aren't the majority of pieces of technology and equipment needed for renewable energy still created using fossil fuels and created in places that are using more and more fossil fuels, like China?
Yeah,
Is that an issue?
I think so, yeah. And I think the recent problems in Europe shows that it's not so easy to just leapfrog to net zero like really quickly. So fossil fuels is still will still be an important part of the energy grid for a very long time, and it's like Adam says, the only way to solve this intermittency problem is by either increasing the transmission capacity so that we can transport this excessively generated wind energy from West Texas to the east where people live, or batteries, or hydrogen. So we need some sort of storage. But this requires so much materials and is of course very, very expensive to build. But Bitcoin miners are incentivizing more energy production, and when we have more energy production, that will lead to very, very cheap renewable energy in certain areas. And that gives very big incentives to develop this transmission capacity to take this energy to the population centers. So Bitcoin mining can actually be a driver for increased build out of transmission capacity in the future, because Bitcoin miners of the future will be much more price sensitive than households. Households are not price sensitive energy consumers because they need energy for heating, for cooking, for very necessary things. But Bitcoin miners, they always know their break-even energy price, and if the energy price is higher, they will shut down production. So Bitcoin miners are not even competing with regular grid customers for energy. So that's an important point.
I feel like there are two ways to think about the renewables and mining, because one thing is, yes, miners being flexible and location agnostic, etc. They are creating new incentive scenarios to build out the renewable solar wind. But it's not just about, because I feel sometimes we want to, that's the way we want to push it to the politicians and general public, like it will help solar wind, so let's just agree with it. But I think the more important story is the wasted energy. We don't have to be adding and using the new energy. The thing is that the world generates like crazy ton of wasted energy that nobody can use, literally. So when you mentioned like miners buying the lowest. It's like, I heard the best analogy is like a dung beetle, like finding the shit and eating that, you know. Because just to give you an example, and going back to the shit, I'm sorry, but we have a mining facility that is super stranded away. You cannot build a huge cow farm in the center of Prague, where we're based. So it is logically stranded, and it produces a lot of cow shit. And we run just reusing that and doing the biogas and mining with that. Show me another market participant that will go and take that shit energy and use it for production of something useful. Only the Bitcoin miners can do that.
You also made me think of the flared gas that's being captured, and methane is so much more potent and dangerous to the environment than even carbon dioxide. So let's talk a little bit about some of these renewable energy sources, because you mentioned in the presentation, you know, we have hydro, we have solar, we have wind, but also nuclear, which a lot of facilities have been closed down. Maybe which sources are you most bullish on?
I mean, it's as an example for the unused energy or kind of wasted energy. So my company Blockstream does some mining in a few different areas, but one of them is in Montreal in Canada. And so the Quebec province has 65 hydro dams, and most of the power is unused. So it's just poured downstream from these dams. And actually, it's a startling statistic that single province of Canada has enough wasted energy, unused energy, to power the entire Bitcoin network. And so, you know, when people are sort of talking on the media about how there's a shortage of power, and you know, any energy that comes from renewable, it should be used for some other purpose. Well, there's enough in that province of Canada, and so you might wonder, why are people not using it? Well, it's because the power company is a crown corporation, so it's owned by the government, and you know, there's some kind of political confusion, so they're foregoing the revenue, which should be, you know, billions of dollars per year, and the water is just flowing downstream. So it's completely neutral, right? It's just going to heat the environment at the bottom of the dam. So, you know, policy cuts both ways. Politicians like to talk about how policy can solve problems, but policy can also waste billions of dollars per year just due to, you know, local confusion, basically.
That's such a great point. Jaran, Kristian?
I believe the best energy sources for mining is hydropower, because as Adam said here, hydropower is very often wasted, because either you don't have a hydropower plant, or you have a massive hydropower plant. There's very difficult to build something in between. So that leads to oversupply of hydropower in certain areas of the world. For example, as Adam said, in Quebec, but also in northern Norway, where I'm from, we have a massive oversupply of hydropower, and we don't have the transmission capacity to get this energy down to Europe. And this has led Bitcoin miners to come there and eat up this excess energy. And of course, that's very beneficial for the generators. And hydropower is also a power source that's generally available in Africa and other developing countries. Asia is also really huge in hydropower. South America. So in the global south, we have massive amounts of hydropower that is underdeveloped. And I really believe that Bitcoin miners of the future will develop this hydropower capacity.
My favorite the stranded wasted energy source would be the flared gas, because many people think like, oh, we'll come with solar and wind, so we stop pumping oil from the ground. This is not the case. Like we need oil to produce asphalt. We need it for a lot of chemicals that we use in plastic and in healthcare. It's like crazy amounts. So oil is not just to run your car. We need it for a lot of things. When they pump the oil, it has gas also there. And what they do is flare it, so literally burn it, because it's uneconomical to do anything with it. So they're literally boiling the oceans by not having anybody to buy the energy, or they're venting it. And venting is way worse, because in methane, CO2 is bad, but methane is like 80 times worse. You'll know the number better than I do about it. I think it's like 80 times worse, and they sometimes just let it out to the atmosphere, and that's boiling the oceans. So that's where miners can, like, again, help, because they come then say, hey, we want that energy. Sell it to us for super cheap, and it's for the oil producers is also good, because they either set it on fire, burn the oceans while doing so, and have zero economic value added on top of it. So it's just, again, Bitcoin miners saving their environment, and that's definitely one of the favorite use case for me with wasted energy.
It's so interesting you mentioned that, because studying this this aspect of Bitcoin, learning more about energy, I had no idea how much oil is in these seats. It's in everything that we're using day to day, and we can't just make that transition very easily. I also remember reading that the first solar panels were actually invented in like the 1800s. The technology was used, but the free market has not gone in that direction. It's too expensive. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about the economics and how Bitcoin will drive down costs to make this actually viable.
Yeah, I mean, Blockstream is doing a small, like a pilot project in Texas, actually, in partnership with Block, formerly Square. And the idea there is to, build some solar power. And so we had Tesla install the solar field, and also using Tesla Megapack batteries so that it can store excess energy during the day and run miners at night as well. And so, you would think that that would be expensive, but I think the few advantages that Bitcoin has. So, if you're building a new power facility for a town or an industrial park, in the first year it probably won't get used at all, because it will take a year to get bureaucratically, to get connected to the grid. And then the local business development community has got to attract people to move there. And so your return on investment is really delayed and gradual start, whereas Bitcoin, can use every kilowatt of power generated from day one, before it's connected to the grid, all the surplus after it's connected to the grid. And so, that greatly improves the economics, because if you have power generation capacity and it's effectively switched off, it's not earning a return on investment. I think the other thing that helps is the technology's improved over years. The battery technology is better today. The economics on batteries is being driven down by mass production for automotive use. And the solar panels are getting more efficient and cheaper. And the warranties from the suppliers like Tesla are actually quite long duration. So, you can operate them secure in the knowledge that the supplier is going to, help you maintain them or replace them if they fall below a certain efficiency level.
Do any of you want to add to that as well?
I agree with everything, but it's super short time to go. It's extremely deep rabbit hole. So just to show you the other side of the coin, like the issues that we have to face and solve as the mining industry. For example, before the grid connection, the thesis is very simple. So you build out large solar farm, and it just maybe the grid is still not there, or the grid connection just takes time. There's a long list, and to hook you up to the grid, you can wait, for example, few months, and it's just very simple. And in economic incentive, they can already mine and not be connected to the grid, so they add revenue before they can join the grid. But to show you the other side of the kind of challenges, we just wrote a book on mining, Bitcoin mining handbook, and we have you can meet me after the panel discussion. We have like 30 of them for free, and the rest can download for free from our website later this month. But we did a research where it's just super challenging just to mine sometimes. If you model out the cash flow, it is challenging because you literally, the numbers work better if it's 24/7. And the biggest problem is the hardware market. So the one of the biggest challenges is the hardware commodification, or how do you pronounce that thing? And that's one of the biggest challenges we have to overcome, so that those solar mining use cases, they work in time. So I'm very bullish, but there are huge issues and problems that we have to face. One more thing that I will mention as a rabbit hole issue is the chips are very good when they run. So when you turn them on and off a lot, it just damages them. It's like the amortization on those chips. It's very simple. It's like a racing car. If you start the engine and go 200 kilometers an hour for 30 seconds, then turn it off completely. It just destroys them. But there are ways to combat that as well. For example, with firmware optimizations, you can ramp it down slowly, etc. But I just want to emphasize there are challenges, and we're super early in the industry. So come work for Bitcoin, and because we have to fix all those issues so that the future works.
Before we start to wrap up, do any of you want to touch a little bit on the potential for nuclear? Because it's been so criminalized over the last several decades, and yet it has so much potential to provide energy, and so many facilities that are being closed down, no longer used, and yet it provides zero emission energy at low costs. So where do you see that going, potentially with Bitcoin?
I think the wind is definitely changing for nuclear power. When I talked to people 5 years ago about nuclear power, most people were still brainwashed about it and afraid of it. But now when I talk to people about it, most people like the idea of nuclear power. And one argument that is often has been used against nuclear power is that it's expensive. And yes, it's not one of the cheapest energy sources. But it's because there hasn't been any innovation in nuclear power in 40 years. Of course, it's going to be a little bit more expensive then. So I really believe nuclear power is the energy source of the future, because you don't have the potential to build hydropower or geothermal power everywhere. They're localized to specific areas. But with nuclear power, you can actually transport the fuel to the power plants. You can build them close to cities, and they can therefore play a very big role in energy systems in the future. And Bitcoin mining and nuclear power is actually a match made in heaven, because nuclear power is baseload power. That means that it's hard to ramp it up or down, so it's usually only supplying the baseload of the power system. With Bitcoin mining, you can use the Bitcoin mining facility to ramp up and down the power supply. So that in that way you can actually make a nuclear power plant into a more peak power plant, in addition to a baseload power plant. So it can revolutionize nuclear power as well.
Well, I want to end a little bit on that note of these shifting narratives, because I think a lot of people hear out there, that nuclear is dangerous, that Bitcoin mining uses too much energy, all the FUD that we mentioned a little bit earlier. There might also be this push that proof of stake is better because it's better for the environment. So what can people do, within their own communities? What can people say to their community members, their friends, their family members that hear the media FUD, and how can we empower them to respond in a way that's intelligent and say, actually, this is what you need to know about Bitcoin mining and renewable energy?
Not that simple, right? I guess the point is that we've talked about a number of the factors, and so you can point to counterexamples about big excess energy in stranded locations. I think that's one good example. The fact that economic activity to consume power creates the financial means to build more power and leads to economic prosperity. Because I think the other direction of turning off power and then demanding that people use less power leads to economic depression, which is not a positive note. And I think, to your point about the nuclear power situation, I think the Ukraine war has caused some countries to reconsider their policies to balance a bit more towards energy sovereignty, because depending on other countries for core energy needs is proven to be problematic. So certainly, Germany has been turning some nuclear power plants back on, and I think that might, encourage other countries to reinvest in nuclear. And there are new companies in the startup space working on next generation nuclear technology. So I think there are much more interesting forms of nuclear power generation which have improved safety, reduced size, lower cost, more efficiency. So as that research and development draws to fruition, that could be an interesting part of the global power makeup.
Energy debate is definitely the final boss in Bitcoin. Like that's what can kill it. That's the final battle we have to have. Because if you really think and look at the narratives or stories like terrorist money, etc., it's boring anymore. If everybody found out, doesn't stick. But everybody's concerned about the planet. Like, I don't want to boil the oceans. The last thing I want to do. So, and you have the education again, and that's we wanted decentralized money, so there is no dedicated marketing department going and educating everybody, so we have to do the part. So we wrote a book on basics on Bitcoin mining, and we'll distribute it for free. It's like, you have to take the actions, because Bitcoin mining is really helping the environment, and it's up to us. Nobody will do the work. We have to. But we decided we want decentralized money, so we have to work on it.
That's such a good point. Jaran, final thoughts?
It's very hard to educate people on it, but I think people need to have a fundamental education in that energy is not something that you shouldn't try to control people's consumption of energy. Energy is the base layer of the economy, and if you start trying to control it, it will not lead to good things. And why should Bitcoin mining be held to higher standards than other industries? Is how we should respond to this. People have no right, politicians have no right to hold Bitcoin mining to a higher standard than other industries. So I think we need to be more aggressive in our replies to that. We shouldn't just accept it. We shouldn't let us pressure into a corner and just trying to defend it. We need to be more offensive.
I think that's a great place to leave it on, because we need more energy, not less. We need an abundance in energy. We have scarcity finally in money, and that can lead to some powerful things. And remember, be skeptical, because there are headlines in the 1970s and 80s saying that we're headed into the next ice age, that the world is actually going to freeze. Now it's flipped. Politicians love a good crisis. I think the next one's going to be climate and energy. So everyone give it up for the panel. Thank you so much.